terms of performance, critical rendering path optimization is essential. But what is critical rendering path and how does it work? The critical rendering path. Critical. It is absolutely needed. Rendering. To render means to display. All our pages are rendered. And as for path, this is the chain of events. Putting it all together, it is a series of events that must take place to render the page, to make your web page appear on a browser. In other words, steps that browser takes to receive HTML, CSS, and JavaScript bytes to display the initial view of a web page. Let's make a remark for the initial view. It is not the whole page, it is only the part of a web page visible to a user before they scroll. So if we look here, this part is the initial view, also known as above the fold. It is important to know how the browsers render pages for understanding how a website's performance can be improved. Now let's look on this path. So the browser needs to get HTML, get all the resources, parse all the files, and display a web page. There are 6 stages. So first the browser downloads the HTML file and transforms HTML into a document object model, or DOM. First, browser converts bytes to characters, then identify tokens, converts tokens to nodes, and builds the DOM tree. Nodes are created for each element text on the page. If you open Chrome DevTools and record a timeline while the page is loaded, you will see the time it takes to parse HTML. A good thing is that HTML can be executed in parse. It means that to display the page, the full document doesn't have to be downloaded, only the initial view of the page. CSS and JavaScript, on the other hand, can block the page's rendering. So the browser reads the HTML and sees that, for example, there are 1 CSS file, 1 JavaScript file, and 1 image. He starts downloading the image, then he decides that the page can be displayed without first getting the CSS and JavaScript. So the browser downloads the CSS file and reads it to make sure that nothing is being called. CSS markup is transformed into a CSS object model, or CSS-OM. The CSS bytes are converted into characters, then tokens, then nodes, and finally they are linked into a tree structure known as the CSS object model. Chrome DevTools allows us to inspect the construction of DOM and CSS-OM. CSS cannot be used in parts because of its inherent cascading nature. Styles can be overriding, that's why the browser will not construct the render tree until the CSS is completely parsed. That's why CSS is considered a render blocking resource, but only if they apply to the current device. For example, if you specify styles with media queries, then styles that you specify for mobile devices with media attributes of screen size will not be considered render blocking if you are using desktop. CSS is not only render blocking, but it can also be script blocking, because JavaScript files wait CSS-OM to be constructed. Okay, so CSS-OM is constructed, and now the browser downloads the JavaScript file and reads it to make sure that nothing is being called. JavaScript is a parse blocking resource because it blocks the HTML parsing. When the browser reaches a script tag, it stops the parsing of the HTML document and runs JavaScript. The next stage is building the render tree. This is the combination of DOM and CSS-OM. Now the browser knows how to display the web page. The browser figures out the layout, determines the size of the viewport and the positioning of each element. So it paints, converts the visible part of the page into pixels, and only after that our page loads. As for JavaScript, users interact with the page and JavaScript constantly modifies the page. It causes a redraw of the render tree, go through the layout and paint again. If we look at the event log pane for the page load, this is what we get. So first we see here send request. This is a GET request sent for index.html file. Then parse HTML and send request. The browser begins parsing of HTML and DOM construction. Parse style sheet. This is where CSS OM is created. Evaluate script. JavaScript is evaluated. Layout. The browser generates layout based on meta viewport tag in HTML. And paint. It paints pixels on document. Knowledge of the CRP is essential and useful because optimization of these events can be the quickest way to significantly faster web pages. This is Chrome Developer Tools course. To get more information, click the link in the description and enroll now.